2. Scheherezade, the king, and the words, took the time to explain. One late afternoon, Ma tells CR to me why the tales were called A, 1001 NHTs. It was no accident because for each one of those many, many nights, Scheherezade, the young bride, had to spin an entrancing, captivating tale to make her husband, the king, forget his angry plan to execute her at dawn. I was terrorized. Mother, do you mean that if the king does not like Scheherazade's story, he will call in his siaf, executioner? I kept asking for alternatives for the poor girl. I wanted other possibilities. How could story displease the king? Yet Scheherezade he allowed to live. Why could Scheherezade not just say what she wanted without having to worry about the king? Or why could she not reverse the situation in the palace and request that the king tell her a captivating story every night? Then he would realize how frightening it was to have to please someone who had the power to chop off your head. Mother said that I needed to hear the details first, then I could look for escapes. Scheherazade's marriage to the king, she said, was not a normal one at all. It had taken place under very bad circumstances. King Shahryar had discovered his wife in bed with a slave, and deeply hurt and enraged, had beheaded them both. To his great amazement, however, he discovered that the double murder was not enough to make him forget his ferocious anger. Revenge became his nightly obsession. He needed to kill more women. So he asked his vizier, the highest official in his court, who also happened to be Scheherazade's father, to bring him a virgin every night. The king would then marry her, stay with her that night, and order her executed at dawn. And so he did for 3 years, killing more than 1,000 innocent girls, till folk raised outcry against him and cursed him, praying Allah utterly to destroy him and his rule. And women made an uproar, and mothers wept, and parents fled with their daughters till there remained not in the city a young person for carnal copulation. To the power of carnal copulation, explained mother when cousin Samir jumped up and down and yelled for an explanation, was when bride and groom lay together in a bed and slept until morning. Finally, one day, in all the city, there were only 2 virgins left, Scheherezade, the eldest daughter of the vizier, and her little sister, Dunyazad. When the vizier went home that evening, pale and preoccupied, Scheherezade asked him what was the matter. He told her his problem, and she reacted in a way her father did not expect at all. Instead of begging him to help her escape, she immediately volunteered to go and spend the night with the king. "I wish thou wouldst give me in marriage to this King Shahryar," she said. "Either I shall live, or I shall he a ransom for the." Quoted from the Wonderful Translation, the Book of the 1001 Nights, by Richard F. Burton. Privately printed by the Burton Club. Date of publication unknown. Introduction written in 1885, Vol. 1, p. 14. However, the Burton translation can be confusing at times with its archaic language. Modern recent translations may be easier for beginners to read. Virgin daughters of Muslims and the cause ot their deliverance from his hands, and thine. Scheherazade's father, who loved her dearly, opposed such a plan and tried to convince her that she had to help him think of another solution. Marrying her to Shahryar was like condemning her to certain death. But she, unlike her father, was convinced that she had exceptional power and could stop the killing. She would cure the troubled king's soul simply by talking to him about things that had happened to others. She would take him to faraway lands to observe foreign ways, so he could get closer to the strangeness within himself. She would help him see his prison, his obsessive hatred of women. Scheherazade was sure that if she could bring the king to see himself, he would want to change and to love more. Reluctantly, her father gave in, and she was married that very night to Shahryar Tada the power of. As soon as she entered King Shahryar's bedroom, Scheherazade started telling him such a marvelous story, which she cleverly left hanging at a most suspenseful part, that he could not hear to part with her at dawn. So he let her live until the next night, so she could finish her tale. But on the second night, Scheherazade told him another wonderful story, which she was again far from finishing when dawn arrived, and the king had to let her live again. The same thing happened the next night. And the next, for 1,000 nights, which is almost 3 years, until the king was unable to imagine living without her. By then, they already had. I was amazed to realize that to many Westerners, Scheherezade was considered a lovely but simple-minded entertainer, someone who narrates innocuous tales and dresses fabulously. In our part of the world, Scheherezade is perceived as a courageous heroine and is one of our rare female mythical figures. Scheherezade is a strategist and a powerful thinker who uses her psychological knowledge of human beings to get them to walk faster and leap higher. Like Saladin and Sindhad, she makes us older and more sure of ourselves and of our capacity to transform the world and its people. 2 children, and after 1,001 nights, he renounced his terrible habit chopping women's heads. When Mother finished Scheherazade's story, I cried. But how does one learn how to tell stories which please kings? Mother mumbled, as if talking to herself, that was a woman's light time work. This reply did not help me much course. But then she added that all I needed to know toward the moment was that my chances happiness would depend upon how skillful I became with words. With this knowledge, Samir and I, who had already decided to avoid upsetting the grown-ups with unwelcomed words, thanks to the radio incident, started training ourselves. We would sit hours, silently practicing, chewing words, and turning them 7 times around our tongues, all the while watching the grown-ups to see if they were noticing anything. But the grown-ups never noticed anything, especially on the courtyard level, where life was very proper and strict. Only upstairs were things less rigid. There, divorced and widowed aunts, relatives, and their children occupied a maze small rooms. The number relatives living with us at any one time varied according to the amount conflict in their lives. Distant female relatives would sometimes come to seek refuge on our top floors for 2 weeks when they got into HETs with their husbands. Some would come to stay with their children for a short time only, just to show their husbands that they had another place to stay, that they could survive on their own and were not desperately dependent. This strategy often was successful, and they would return home in a stronger bargaining position. But other relatives came to stay for good, after a divorce or some other serious problem, and this was one of the traditions Father always worried about whenever someone attacked the institution harem light. Where will the troubled women go? He would say. The rooms upstairs were very simple, with white-tiled floors, whitewashed walls, and sparse furniture. Very narrow sofas, upholstered with multi-flowered peasant cottons and cushions, were scattered here and there, along with easily washable raffia mats. Wet feet, slippers, and even the occasional spilled cup of tea did not produce the same excessive reactions up here as they did downstairs. Life upstairs was so much easier, especially since everything was also accompanied by hatiyai, a Moroccan emotional quality that I rarely have encountered elsewhere. Hanan is hard to dini exactly. Hut, basically. It is a free-flowing, easygoing, unconditionally available tenderness. People who give luan, like Aunt Hahiha, never threaten to withdraw their love when you commit some unintentional minor or even major infraction. Hawa was hard to come by downstairs, especially among the mothers, who were too busy teaching you to respect the frontier to bother with tenderness. Upstairs was also the place to go for storytelling. You would climb the hundreds of glazed steps that led all the way up to the 3rd and top floor of the house, and the terrace which lay before it, all whitewashed, spacious, and inviting. That was where Aunt Hahiha had her room. Small and quite empty. Her husband had kept everything from their marriage, with the idea that should he ever lift his finger and ask her to come home again, she would bow her head and come rushing back. But he can never take the most important things away from me, Aunt Tahia would say sometimes. My laughter and all the wonderful stories I can tell when the audience is worth it. I once asked cousin Malika what our aunt meant by an audience who is worth it, and she confessed that she did not know either. I said maybe we should ask her directly. Hut Malika said no. Better not, because Aunt Hahiha might start crying. Aunt Hahiha often cried for no reason. Everyone said so, but we loved her and could hardly sleep on Thursday nights. So excited were we at the prospect OT her Friday storytelling sessions. These gatherings usually ended in great contusion because they lasted too long, according to our mothers, who were often forced to climb up all those stairs to fetch us. And then we would scream, and the most spoiled of my cousins, like Samir, would roll on the floor and shout that they did not feel sleepy. Not at all. But you did manage to stay until the story ended. That is until the heroine triumphed over her enemies and crossed back over the 7 rivers, 7 mountains, and 7 seas. You were faced with yet another problem. You were scared to go hack down the stairs. First OT all, there was no light. The switches to the stairlights were all controlled by Ahmed, the doorkeeper from the entrance gate. He turned them OT at 9 p.m. to signal that everyone on the terrace was going in and all traffic ought to be officially stopped. The second problem was that a whole population of jinnis, demons, was out there, lurking in silence and waiting to jump out at you. And last, but not the least, was the fact that cousin Samir was so good at imitating the jinnis that I often mistook him for the real thing. Several times, I literally had to feign passing out to get him to stop from posing as a jinni. Sometimes, when the story lasted for hours, the McVeethers did not appear, and the whole house fell suddenly silent. We would beg Aunt Habiba to let us spend the night with her. She would unfold her beautiful bridal carpet, the one she kept carefully folded behind her cedar chest, and cover it with a clean white sheet and perfume it with orange flower water, special for the occasion. She did not have enough cushions for all of us to use as pillows, but that was not a problem, as we did not care. She would share with us her huge heavy wool blanket, turn the electric light, and place a big candle on the threshold at our feet. If by any chance someone needs to go urgently to the toilet, she would say, remember that this carpet is the only things I have which reminds me of my previous life as a happily married lady. So, on these graceful nights, we would fall asleep listening to our aunt's voice opening up magic glass doors leading to moonlit meadows. And when we awoke in the morning, the whole city lay at our feet. Aunt Hahiha had a small room, had a large window with a view that reached as far as the northern mountains. She knew how to talk in the night. With words alone, she could put us onto a large ship sailing from Aden to the Maldives, or take us to an island where the birds spoke like human beings. Riding on her words, we traveled past Sind and Hind, India, leaving Muslim territories behind, living dangerously, and making friends with Christians and Jews who shared their bizarre foods with us and watched us do our prayers while we watched them do theirs. Sometimes we traveled so far that no gods were to be found, only sun and fire worshippers, but even they seemed friendly and endearing when introduced by Aunt Habiba. Her tales made me long to become an adult and an expert storyteller myself. I wanted to learn how to talk in the night,